men who had flown with him in Afghanistan in the 80s, who still held some measure of loyalty, though they had risen to loftier heights. Skilled pilots with Mikhailov's experience were hard to find, and he told himself he was better while in his cups than half the kids in today's Federation Air Force when they were flying sober. The disciplinary hearing had been excruciating. Listening to one's numerous shortcomings was difficult enough when drunk. A clear head made it nearly unbearable as the panel of generals ticked down the list, fault by disgusting fault. Those well-placed friends didn't stop the panel from threatening to have him cashiered, but even through the fog of shame, he knew better. Had they wanted to take away his pension, they would have simply done it, not threatened it. Though at times he felt a bucket would have been the perfect vessel from which to drink more vodka, Colonel Mikhailov managed to keep his mouth shut during the process. He did precisely as he was told, and he eventually earned back his wings. Wings that brought with them enough trust for this mission. He'd flown his Antonov 124 to Zhukovskovo Airport from Migalovo the day before. The runway at the 6955th home base was adequate for the enormous bird so long as she was empty, but load her up and it was a different story. 74,352 kilograms heavier than it was the day before. The AN-124 now needed substantially more runway on takeoff than Megalovo provided. Zhukovskovo was located some 36 kilometers southeast of Moscow along the Moskva River. It served not only as a civilian international airport, but also as home to Gromov Flight Research Institute, which added to the security protocols needed for sensitive missions like this one. Apart from the performance and security reasons for changing airports, the 200-kilometer flight served as a shakedown run for the crew of 6. 4 of them new to Mikhailov. He had flown with one of the 2 engineers before, but the other, along with the radio man, navigator, and first officer, were not from the 224th. Substitutions like this happened, especially on this type of mission, but the AN-124 community was relatively small, and he was surprised he'd never met any of these men. Had he stood on firmer ground with respect to his wings, he would have asked more questions. Mikhailov knew his reputation as a skilled pilot was unmatched in the notoriously tricky Antonov, but his reputation as a drunk was just as well known, even outside the military. The new crew members observed him carefully during the pre-flight briefing for any evidence of alcohol. He'd arrived early this evening, used his identification card to badge his way through the concentric layers of gates, doors, and armed security personnel, making it to his airplane in time to watch the onboard overhead cranes and powerful winches load the 2 20-meter-long wooden crates through the tail door. His flight manifest noted that the contents of each box were Osoboy Vazhnosti, of particular importance, what the United States called top secret. Their destination was Sary-Shagan in central Kazakhstan, making the classification somewhat moot. Sary-Shagan was a missile test facility, so there was no question as to what these were. There were no markings, other than computer barcodes, but dosimeters affixed to the fore end of each crate left little doubt that the items inside were nuclear. As pilot in command, he had to be informed that each item weighed a little over 37,000 kilos. The length and weight narrowed it down a bit, some kind of medium-range missile, surely a new model, since they were on their way to be tested. Mikhailov was paid to transport, not to deduce. It didn't matter to him what he carried, so long as he was flying. Attachment points on the missiles themselves protruded through small cutouts in the wood along the length of the crates, allowing the Antonov's internal crane system to load each item through the massive rear cargo door and nestle them all securely in the bay. There was room to spare. Mikhailov had moved a battalion of soldiers, huge military trucks, tanks, other aircraft, even a rescue submarine. He and his fellow pilots were fond of saying they were capable of transporting the Kremlin, so long as the weight was correctly distributed. The loadmasters would stow the massive tow bar in the rear cargo area.